listening to The Tabletop Minimalist, a podcast about minimalism and thoughtful consumerism in the modern tabletop gaming hobby. Settle in and enjoy. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of The Tabletop Minimalist. I'm Ricky, and Jamie, how's it going? It's been a while.
Ricky, it has been a while. Great to be here with you.
Likewise, yeah. How's things with you?
Let's just say I've been in almost a 2-month drought of any in-person gaming for the most part. So I've been getting by playing some online gaming, but that's about it. I started between a 2-week vacation to Italy in April and starting a new job. I've been very busy the past 2 months, so gaming hasn't quite been my focus.
Yeah, I had a similar thing earlier this year where things were just ramping up work-wise my end. Luckily, it's started to ease up, so hopefully it'll be the same for you.
I guess considering we've both kind of been in a similar situation, let's just say since our last recording, have there been any notable highlights or plays that you want to talk about quickly before we dive into today's topic?
Yeah, there's one, because I mean, I was struggling to get games to the table like you, but just over the past weekend, my brother visited from Spain, so we managed to get a few games in. I won't talk about all of them, but one in particular that I did get to play was a game called Mini Rails, which is... It's
actually, I used to own this game. It's a publisher in Taiwan.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, because it's got the... I did notice that actually when I got it, and I think
it's
there's
like
a new...
Mobius or something like that?
Yeah. And they've got a new version coming out soon, which I don't have. I've got the older version. But yeah, this is a game by Mark Gerritz. And you said you played it before.
Many years ago. I played it a few times, really enjoyed it. And I ended up sending it along its way. But that would definitely be a game I would happily replay again.
It's a cool game. I mean, for people that haven't don't know what it is, it's kind of like a simpler or very much streamlined train stock market 18xx type game, distilled right down to basically 2 actions where first of all, you have this sort of hexagonal board in front of you that is modular, so it's going to be slightly different each time. And you can either buy a share or build a track, and that's basically one of your 2 actions. And if you buy a share, you take one of the discs that are available each round and basically put it at 0 on your share track. Or if you build a track, you instead use that disc as a piece of track that you put on the board, and that's going to change the value of all the shares that are of that colour. So it's a very interactive game where you are looking at what other people have and trying to sort of improve your own stock and mess up theirs, but also keeping an eye on what stock's going to score, because basically there's going to be one leftover disc at the end of each round, and that's going to go down onto this score track. So not every stock will necessarily score either. So it becomes very interesting towards the end when you are trying to sort of make sure that your stocks score and other people's don't, but sometimes they've got the same stock as you, so you don't want to boost that color up too much if it's going to score. It's very interactive, and it does a lot with very little, I think. But it's also a game that really, I mean, I've only played 4. I've had 2 games of it, and I've played 4-player both times, and I don't know if it would be good with any less than 4 players. But yeah, it's a really fun game, and I think the new version has a 2-player and solo mode as well. I don't have that. I don't think it's out yet. I think it was recently on, I want to say Kickstarter, I'm not sure. But yeah, really fun game if you can grab a hold of it, and it's sort of only about 20 minutes long as well.
Yeah, it's a very good thinky filler.
Yeah.
And if you especially like Cube Rails or 18xx, as Ricky said, I think in terms of the spectrum between 18xx on the very complex and deep end, this is on the opposite end in terms of minimalism and just the shares and all that being distilled to its absolute purity.
Yeah, exactly. And for someone who would love to, dip my toe in the more complex side of things, but doesn't really have the players at the moment to do that, this was a fun way of being able to do that, because I think it can work for a wide range of player types. Like there's enough there to chew on for someone like me, and it's also very easy to teach as well.
So I'll just, as I mentioned, I've hardly really played anything in the past 2 months, but I've had one highlight that I'm happy to share. So for those who managed to listen through our entire top 25 list, one of my games is a very obscure self-published abstract game called Astley. And I think for another one of these designers' games, I kind of have the habit on BGG after I play a few games, I'll leave comments. And generally, I won't leave like a star rating unless I played it several times. For this one, I just left some comments. So it was funny, out of the blue, this designer sent me a message asking, hey, even if the star rating wouldn't be great, once, if a game gets enough star ratings, and I guess it just gets better visibility on the site. So I did so. And in that message, he invited me to try out another one of his games on Abstract Play, which I did. And this game's called Morphos. So kind of like Morpheus, but Morphos with a OS at the end. And this is similar to another one of my favorites, Slither, in that it's a connection game. The idea being you're trying to connect two sides of the board on a square Go board. And what's kind of funny is if you've played enough of these different types of games, you'll notice that a lot of these abstract designers, they're trying to overcome, let's just say, a bug in connection games on square boards, which is this idea of a crosscut. So that's where if you have two stones that are diagonal to each other, how do the game rules resolve this? Because quite often they can lead to draws. So a lot of these designers are always trying to come up with solutions to this problem. And I've tried a few of them and I've never quite liked them. But let's just say Morphos might be my favorite recent abstract game since Slither.
Cool.
I suppose the main reason I like it so much is that it's really elegant. Like, even in terms of rules and everything, it's very elegant and simple. Basically, you just need to remember 2 or 3 different patterns that the stones form, and you're off to the races. And it's for me, I'm just really enjoying the emergent, tense competition and fights all over the board. I have yet to win a game, but I still keep adding and joining new games and playing, and I'm just really enjoying it so far. So for any of you who would be interested in dabbling, I think I've recommended this in previous episodes, but if you enjoy or want to dabble into or explore some good abstracts, Abstract Play is a great site for that.
I think there's a lot to explore there, because even on like the BGG page, there's so little about these games, the sort of the more obscure abstract ones. So there's clearly a whole world out there on Abstract Play.
Anything in terms of new acquisitions or culls before we dive in?
Yeah, so one game that I have been looking to cull is Omen, A Reign of War by John Cloudus. He creates a lot of these small sort of 2-player head-to-head card games. And this is one that I've had for a little while, and it's basically where you have 3 cities in front of you and you're trying to gain majorities in those cities and basically win them for scoring opportunities by placing units on either side. It's quite a fun game, but again, I think I play a lot of 2-player games as it is anyway. I generally, when I'm looking at purchasing games, I look for games that are good at 2-player. So having a game that is 2-player only that doesn't quite hit the same heights for me, there's not really much worth in playing it, because I think I'm always going to gravitate towards something else. And I do think as well that the game is very much, there's not that much content in the box. There's enough for a few plays for sure, but I do think that there's some expansions that he's come out with, and in order to get the full experience, you're kind of encouraged to get those expansions because they add different scoring opportunities. Otherwise, it's kind of the same each game, and I'm not really willing to go down that route and purchase the other stuff for it. So that's what I'm culling. In terms of acquisitions, the only one was Mini Rails, actually, which is one I did get to play pretty much straight away, which I'm pleased about.
I'll just quickly briefly mention a recent acquisition of note, which is last year, Millennium Blades by Level 99 Games had a crowdfunding campaign. I already owned the base game, but they had some expansions that I kind of wanted to get my hands on. So all those arrived. I took some time to create my own custom insert for the box. So all of the content is in the main box.
Cool.
So now all I need to do is just find some willing guinea pigs to join me for a few plays. But I'm very excited for that, to really finally get it to the table this year.
Yeah, this is one you haven't played before yet, isn't it?
Yeah, so I would say backing that campaign last year definitely went against some of our principles. But again, Millennium Blades is kind of goes against a lot of those things anyway. But I'm very excited to finally get it played eventually, sometime this year.
Does this new expansion have a solo mode included, or is that already out?
So
it does, yeah.
So I'm actually thinking about trying to solo it at some point before, just so I'm kind of familiar with how it plays, and then I can I think that'll make introducing it to some other players make for a smoother experience.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
So Ricky, let's get into what's our topic for today.
So our topic for today is how to play your games more often. So we're just looking at basically first of all, why would you want to play your games more often, and what are some of the things that we can do in order to help get those to the table?
Yeah, so I think the main reason I think this is all a matter of preference and maybe philosophy when it comes to gaming. Let's just say if you fall on the collector end of the spectrum, then maybe you don't care. And maybe somewhere in the middle, where I think there are some gamers who are perfectly content with playing a game once, twice, or 3 times, and maybe going months or years in between plays, and that doesn't bother them. I just think for me, when I look at the games in my collection, there's something just satisfying of being able to play them a lot.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I remember actually, I think we discussed this maybe in our first episode very briefly, about there was a time where my mindset kind of shifted from being really excited about trying loads of new games and all of the new hotness and all of that, and then actually looking at my shelf and kind of having this kind of, not an epiphany, but something a bit like that, where I thought, you know what, there's actually so much here to discover that I haven't really dived in on, and there's a lot of joy to be had there. And from that point, which might have been maybe three or 4 years ago, it's been something that I've really wanted to sort of pursue a lot more.
So I think in this episode, Ricky and I are just going to take turns maybe sharing some tips, principles, advice that'll help you get some of the games in your collection played more often. Or maybe there's just maybe you're taking part in a challenge, or maybe there's just a particular game or two that you haven't played in a while and you want to get it played. So we want to lay out some ideas. So Ricky, why don't you take us away?
Okay, well, I mean, first of all, I think that the elephant in the room, so to speak, is the fact that both of us have small collections, which, in part really helps, being able to play games more often, because you've got less choice. You haven't got that paradox of choice so much. So obviously, if you have a big collection, and I'm not telling people that have big collections to cull all their games and trim it right down to a small collection, but I do think that having a smaller collection to begin with, you already kind of got a head start in terms of getting games that you want to play more often to the table more often.
I think, and along those lines, maybe a corollary of that is just being hyper-realistic about what types of games are in your collection. So what I mean by that is perhaps culling any aspirational or what-if games, because just having those games on your shelf is, again, diluting the potential time that you can spend on the games that you really want to play.
Yeah, and to add to that as well, you've also got to be realistic in terms of games that you're able to play with a group, because there's so many games that I would, hypothetically love to play, and given the right circumstances would be able to play more often. But, there's things such as what your regular group wants to play, or how much time you've got each week to be able to actually play it. I don't particularly have any really big sort of campaign games, because I just know that I wouldn't get them. They wouldn't get the time that they deserve. And therefore, it's just, it would give me anxiety with it just sitting there, but I also can't commit to playing it.
So, Ricky, you mentioned something about a group, about gaming groups, and let's just say how easy it is to get games to the table with groups. So I have two ideas when it comes to groups. Number one, and this was actually one of my goals for this year, which I have yet to accomplish, which is just organizing a regular gaming group. So whether that's meeting once a week, meeting, every 2 weeks or once a month, whatever it be, you can not only, that's the first part, is organizing a group, but also, let's just say, organizing the group maybe with a theme, which is, with this group, we're going to agree on a certain amount of games that we want to cycle through for a period of time. And that way you can at least have some satisfaction and fulfillment from the fact that that the entire group is getting some of these regular games to the table.
I mean, I'm always of the side that if people don't want to play games, then you shouldn't force them to do so, because it's not going to be an enjoyable experience for anyone. But if you've got players that maybe are on the fringes of the hobby and might want to dip their toe in, keeping it sort of to specific games or to make it as less overwhelming as possible could be a good way to sort of start a new gaming group with newer gamers, if that's something that you're interested in.
And I would say one benefit of this type of gaming experience or gaming group is that you don't have to go to gaming night learning new games every single time. There is something to be said for getting together with a group where every single person at the table knows the rules and you can just dive into it.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's something that I've come to appreciate a lot. I went to a gaming group. I still go to a gaming group, not as often now, but where the guy that runs it has a huge collection, and he's bringing new games to the table each week. And after a while, I did long, as much as I do like to explore what's out there, I long to just be able to sit down and play a game that I already knew, and I'm not even a new player. So there's something to be said definitely about just being able to dive into a game that you already are familiar with and want, you're excited to explore further.
So along this lines of a regular group, or maybe you're playing a handful of games over and over again, let's niche down even further and let's organize a gaming group around a specific game. So let's just say traditionally bridge, here in Taiwan and China, mahjong. I know I've heard of some groups who regularly get together just to play Twilight Imperium 4, and so on. And in fact, I think outside of the modern gaming hobby, the way games, whether they be card games or trick taking or whatever, have traditionally been played this way, which is, people, maybe they only play one game their entire life. Like my aunt and uncle, I don't know if they still do, but I know for a time, every single week for years, they would meet with another couple and play pinochle every week. So I also think regularity around a single game could be a way to do this. So if there's one game that you really, really love, you could potentially consider forming a group just to play that game.
It's interesting because I think the games that you mentioned are games that have so much potential to explore, like TI4, Bridge. I mean, Bridge and Mahjong are games that have been played for years and years and years. Teach You's another one that comes to mind as a sort of couples game that is really good for that sort of consistent plays. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can't do that for any game.
Absolutely. So I think that the next one, and I think this is something that, especially since the pandemic, has definitely improved a lot, which is the availability of online and digital versions of games. So whether that be apps, Tabletop Simulator, Tabletopia, BGA, Yukata, Abstract Play, and so on, it's becoming easier and easier to find and play the games you love online.
Yeah, I mean, those are particularly great for games that you don't necessarily own or used to own, or games that you're just interested in. But likewise, I'm consistently in games on BGA, Board Game Arena, of games that I actually own because they're just games that I enjoy. I know how to play and I want to explore them further. So there's no problem in doing that either.
And even more so as more and more of these types of websites are emerging, and quite often they revolve around a certain theme. Like there are some where you can play 18xx games, abstract play for abstracts, even splatter games and so on. So more often than not now, you can very likely find the game you enjoy online.
And BGA, just as one example, the amount that website has grown and developed over the past few years in terms of implementations and the library of games is pretty phenomenal, really.
So another example, and I have a personal anecdote to share for this particular tip, is connecting with other super fans on BGG. So what do I mean by this? There's very likely potentially one game in your collection that for whatever reason, maybe your group, your friends just don't like. You just can't get it played. Maybe you're the black sheep in the group, you're the only one who loves this game and you just want to play more, but you can't find anybody to play it. I had this type of experience with Codex, my favorite game. So I figured, you know what? You can go into any game on BGG and you'll find a handful of people at the very least who rate the game as a 10. You read their comments and they're raving about it. Why not reach out to those people, through BGG and see if they would be interested in trying to play it in some fashion, whether it be, play by thread, play by Discord, or perhaps that game's available in an online format. You can find other passionate players of games this way and get those games played.
On that note, actually, just in general, I mean, I know you're focusing on one particular game, but BGG has been such a great resource for me to just help find players nearby me, for example. I moved house just over, about a year and a half ago now, and I was just on the forums, and there's a section where you can look for sort of like gaming in your area, and I found someone that lives 10 minutes down the road from me who was looking to set up a game night, and we started talking, and that's something that we started doing, which has been you don't realize what's out there until you actually look. And there's also a gaming group just around the corner. Well, it's about a half an hour walk from where I live, where they get together every Monday and play generally lighter games. So it's not something I go to all the time, but even just knowing that there are these communities out there that you might not know of, and that, Board Game Geek is such a great resource for just finding not only super fans of games, but just general fans of gaming that are local to you.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think both Ricky and I don't want to speak here, so correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think Ricky or I are big fans of solo gaming, but I know for sure this has been a zeitgeist in gaming the past few years, is how much solo gaming has grown, not only in popularity, but kind of in general acceptance. I don't know, I always kind of had the feeling like, even now sometimes I kind of feel strange when I'm pulling out a board game on the table and playing by myself. I think people who are not in the hobby kind of look at it as a strange thing. But I will say, solo gaming is one of the best ways to play the games if you're struggling to get them tabled.
I will always prefer to play with someone over playing a game solo, but especially during busy periods, like, as I said, about a month or two ago, when I had, the only time I had to play really was maybe an hour in the evening. That was the perfect time to pull out a game. And also the fact that I've been, staring at screens all day. It was the perfect opportunity to pull out a game and play it solo. And that it surprises me that I'm feeling more and more, I feel as though it's something that I can enjoy more and more. The more I do it, basically. Like I said, it's always going to be better to play with people. But if, for example, there's when a game's got a really good solo mode that kind of simulates another player, that's the sort of solo gaming that I'm generally looking for, because it's less upkeep, it's less fiddliness, and it's less arbitrary. It feels more like you are at least playing against someone else.
Absolutely.
There is a big community around solo gaming on Board Game Geek in particular, and often there are challenges for trying to beat your own score or things like that. And one game in particular, a game that I really like that has a great solo mode, is Newsfjord by Uwe Rosenberg. And they do monthly solo challenges, and they basically tell you what cards to use for the setup. So everyone's playing exactly the same game. And then you basically just play the game, try and get your best score, and then you're welcome to post your strategies. Obviously, you have to make sure that there's any spoilers of cards or whatever, or strategies are covered up so other people can't just nick what you were trying to do. But it's a great way to actually interact with the community and get a game to the table and play it solo, but also feel as though you're not just there touching bits of cardboard by yourself. So I've done that a few times, and I should get back into doing that, actually, because I had fun doing that. I was always generally towards the bottom of the scoring, but it was still good fun to talk about a game you love with other people.
Absolutely. So now I think we'll kind of get into perhaps a more system-based suggestion. And this probably might not be for everyone, but maybe for some people who want a little more structure, or maybe a more systematic approach to getting their games played more often. Perhaps I might suggest a first in, first out type of system, or a queue system, where games that have been kind of either, let's just say a cycle or a list, and that way you know that the games that are been played recently, maybe they'll go on the back burner for a little bit, and you can play games that have been on the shelf longer, something like that. Just some type of system, just so there's a little bit more of a systematic approach to how you play your games.
Something that I wanted to clarify, when you say first in, first out, what exactly do you mean?
I think this was more in spirit rather than a strict interpretation. One way I've always thought about this is, for example, is my shelf of shame, or what's the term that people use now? Let's just call it shelf of shame. Because sometimes you'll buy a list of, you'll buy a bunch of games, and maybe you have 2, 3, 4, 5 games waiting on that shelf. I was always pretty good about being like, okay, whichever game first came in first, I'm going to play that first, and then next and next and next. I wouldn't let excitement, that recency bias or that recency excitement. So I'd always make sure that I've always been pretty good at clearing out my shelf of shame that way.
Another thing that I did want to ask you as well, because you briefly mentioned having a queue system. This is obviously something that's going to be tailored to each person. What do you do if you have a queue system? What does that sort of entail for you?
I'll be completely honest. I don't personally use such a strict or systematic approach. I kind of go more by feel, which is, I'll give a good example. For example, this upcoming Saturday, I've scheduled finally an all-day gaming day with some friends. And I kind of looked at my collection and I just I looked at the games and I made a list of like 10 of the games on the shelf that I would really like to get played. And I'm like, well, realistically, we might only get played, if even on a good day, we might only get played half of these. So what are those 5 going to be? And, kind of narrowing it down to that. So that's kind of what I've been doing more recently, but this is just more of a suggestion for people who are maybe looking for a more systematic approach.
Yeah, I agree, because I'm kind of more based on what you do in that I very much go with my gut in terms of I will choose a small selection of games that perhaps I haven't played in a long time. It generally is because once I have played a game recently, I feel sated by that game unless I'm really sort of, really focused on it. So I will choose a small selection of, generally when I go to play games, I will pack a bag and my bag can fit 3 big box games and a couple of smaller box games in there. So I'm taking 4 or 5 games with me. And I will basically just, go through my shelf and narrow it down to the 3 that generally are games that I probably haven't played in a while, but games that I'm really, in my gut, I really do want to play. I try not to be I think on the flip side, you can, if you are a bit too systematic, you generally, maybe for some people, at least for me, I can start to choose games that I'm using a bit too much logic over actually what I want to actually play, and therefore I'm not getting the most out of my game. So there is a balance there to get right. But games that you haven't played in a while, if you feel as though you want to keep exploring these games, then you will gravitate towards the ones you probably haven't played anyway. And if you're not, then that's probably a sign that maybe you want to be considering to get rid of that game.
Yeah.
And one more thing on the queue sort of, or having a system, you can always reorganize your shelf, order your shelf so that you've got your next up games, and that way you're not fixating on your entire collection or being overwhelmed by your entire collection. You've just got one shelf of games that you do want to play. I know people say shelf of shame, but generally that encompasses the entire collection, at least in my head, and it just feels as though that's just kind of more of a metaphor than actually reorganizing your shelf and putting the games that you want to play up next, and maybe calling it a shelf of opportunity instead of a shelf of shame, so it feels less anxiety inducing and maybe more exciting.
No, I think there's definitely, I think you definitely hear people when they're organizing their collection shelves, implementing different rationale or logic into it. And I think one for sure is maybe highlighting the games you want to play more often, make them more visible. So I think there's something to that.
Yeah.
Along these lines, another fun way, maybe a gamified way that you can play more of your games is with challenges. So these are very popular on Board Game Geek every year, beginning of the year. You'll see geek lists and of these type of challenges coming up. I think most notably like a 10 by 10 or maybe playing each game in your collection once, something like that. So this could also be a fun way, depending on how broad or how deep you want to go. Could be a fun way to give yourself a little challenge to gamify the experience and get after the games you really want to play in a certain year.
Yeah. Have you ever done a 10 by 10 or something similar?
Every time I've tried once or twice, and it's just, I think right now with my gaming life and my lack of gaming frequency, it's just not really practical right now.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe in the future.
Yeah.
When my kids are older or when I can find a more regular gaming group, it could be something I could consider.
Yeah. I mean, I always find that a 10 by 10 for me is a bit too ambitious, but I did I think maybe a 5 by 5 is a good start. And that's something that I feel as though I could very much complete. I mean, I guess you can set a different sort of time limit on each game. I know it's generally a year that you give to play those games, but I haven't officially done one before because I feel as though I'm generally in the lucky position where I feel quite sated by playing most of my games often enough. But I think I could, quite comfortably do a 5x5, maybe like a 7x7 or something like that.
So I think maybe the last one I want to talk about, I'm sure maybe you might have a few more, but this is something that I kind of started doing in the past year and a half, 2 years, which is I noticed with some of the games in my collection, and one issue I think with my gaming lifestyle right now, it's like I usually go so long in between plays of a game that no matter what, I'm always kind of having to relearn or refresh or review games. And I find quite often one of the biggest parts of friction is, the setup or the key, or just kind of very quickly refreshing yourself on the rules so you can get the gist of the game rather than having to reread the rule book from beginning to end. So one thing I've started doing is making my own fast start setup teaching guides. So depending on how deep or how heavy the game is, whether it might just be a one-page fast start so I can quickly set it up and get going, or it might be a player aid that basically encompasses all the rules on a piece of paper. I found for certain games having this in the box that I can pull out, just knowing that I have that resource makes it that much easier to get it to the table.
Yeah, this is a big one as well. And it's something that I think I should probably do more often, because the few games that I have done, or even on BGG, there's often in the files section of games, a lot of very helpful people have done their own sort of brief rule summaries that you can either look online or print off. But I think it's great because often you do just need that little reminder. You don't need to go through the entire rule book. And games also that have a round structure on, say, the back of the rule book as well, where it's just a brief round structure, or even on a reference card or something like that, is also very helpful. One that springs to mind is, I think it's the Taverns of Tiefenthal, which is a game that I do still own and I play from time to time. And that on the back, basically on the back of the rule book, has every step of what you need to do, and it basically teaches you the entire game, at least once you already know how to play, just from referencing that, which is so helpful when you haven't played it in a while.
Another idea or tip that just came to mind, which is, I would say, falls along the same lines as what I just mentioned about making your own custom player aids, fast start guides, or whatever. And this is definitely a little bit more labor intensive, if you will, is getting custom inserts for your games.
Yeah.
So whether you purchase, obviously if you want to take the lazy route, and I don't mean that in a negative way, if you want to there are more and more options where you can buy these custom made inserts for your games. Or you can do what I do sometimes, which I enjoy making my own custom foam core inserts for some of my games, at least the ones I know that I'm going to be getting to the table more often. The main reason I consider this is that really this is one of those things that can dramatically reduce the friction of getting some of your games to the table, especially if they have a lot of components and parts.
Yeah.
We touched on this a little bit, I think, in a previous episode about the big box paradox, which is, you think having all that content in one box is going to make it easier to get a table, but rather it makes it harder.
Yeah.
So I think getting a good insert depending on your budget, can be a great investment in terms of getting, let's just say gaming ROI.
Yeah, definitely. And on that point, actually, the big box paradox is we've mentioned before that, games that have a load of modules and things can also provide a bit of mental paralysis in terms of, it's not just about what am I playing, it's also how am I playing this game as well. So sometimes a big box game can actually provide more anxiety and more difficulty of getting it to the table than perhaps you would think. A game that I have, and I've mentioned this before, is La Granja, the deluxe edition, which has about 14 different modules in there. On one side of things, that can create some anxiety in terms of not being able to explore the game fully. But at the same time, I think the flip side of it is, if it is a game that you do want to play more often and get to the table more often, there is a ton to explore there that can actually be really interesting, and it can also feel like you are playing a new game each time, or at least a new version of that game each time, which kind of blends both exploring new games and getting your games to the table more often in one. So I'm not choosing a side there because I think there's pros and cons, but I do think that is also something to consider, and it bleeds into expansions as well. If you're getting games with lots of expansion content, you've got the same problem or opportunity there as well. It's just something to consider, I think.
So I think that's it now for the main body of today's discussion. I think there's enough ideas there that if you are thinking about different ways to get some games played more often, try them out and let us know how they work for you. And I think that brings us into today's Wildcard segment.
So for today's Wildcard segment, we're basically going to out ourselves and shame ourselves and basically say which games in our own collection have been sitting in the dust the longest, and how we can rectify that and how we'd like to maybe play those games more. So Jamie, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So I think at the moment, probably the game that's been in the dust the longest, or very close to the longest, is Uprising: Curse of the Last Emperor. So I highlighted this game in my top 25 in the last episode. This is a 4X cooperative game from an indie publisher. So I don't think it's super well known. I know that Tom Vassell on Dice Tower did a review on it, but I don't think it's super well known. I played this, honestly, I think 2 weeks before my kids were born, and it was awesome. I really loved it, and I haven't played it since then, and I really want to get it played very soon. In fact, for this upcoming Saturday, I'm seriously considering teaching it to my friends to see what they think.
Yeah.
The only challenge is there is a fair amount of English text, so I'm just debating whether that might be too much for my Taiwanese friends, but we'll see. But in any case, that's probably the game I've gone the longest without playing, so probably, a year and a half now?
Okay, yeah, that's not too bad. For me, actually, I'm in a lucky position where there aren't many games on my shelf that I haven't played in a long time. And actually, part of that, I think, when we were doing our top 25, I was sort of going through some games that I hadn't played in a while and trying to games that I thought might be on there and trying to sort of familiarize myself with them. So prior to that episode, there might have been a few more, but right now, well, there's three, but I'll touch on them very briefly. One of them is Civilization: A New Dawn, which I mentioned. I probably played that about a year ago. I don't know exactly the date, but it was probably around a year ago. And that is quite a hard game to get to the table, generally because you want more than a couple of people to play it. You really want 3 or 4, and it's quite a fiddly game. There's a lot of edge case rules and things which I have to remember and also sort of teach other people again. So there is that, but it is a really fun game if I can get it to the table and get past those barriers, and I would like to soon because it is on my mind. And then very briefly, the other main one is Gloomhaven: Jaws of the Lion.
Okay.
Now I've only played the intro scenario, and this was given to me actually as a gift, which generally I don't like because I like to sort of curate my own collection. And when someone gives you a gift, it's kind of, you feel a bit bad sometimes because you really appreciate it, but also it's like, is this going to fit in this collection that I've very carefully curated? But I do want to play it because, Gloomhaven's got such a good reputation. It was number 1 for years, and this is a more accessible way to play it. And the intro scenario doesn't really, it's a very bare bones version of the game. So I would like to play that. I don't really want to play solo because you have to do 2-handed solo, and that's something I really don't like. So that's one I would probably want to get to the table at some point this year, maybe. And if I don't, then maybe it will go on the coal pile. And then very briefly, the last one is probably Aeon's End, the New Age, which is kind of their expedition version of the game, where it's kind of like a campaign, semi-legacy, where you're opening up little boxes of cards, but you don't rip anything up or anything like that. And I've played maybe two or three of the missions in there. I think there's 4 or 5 per each expedition, and then you can use all the cards and play them all together. And I actually don't like this expedition system, but I also don't want to open up all the cards. I just think it's added fiddliness, and the story's not great. It's just kind of tacked on, I think. I'd rather just play the game and just have the cards. But it's a good quick game to get to the table, and I appreciate that. So I would like to play that again more. So I mentioned 3 there, but they're the 3 that spring to mind.
No, that's a great list.
Yeah, so that's going to do it for this episode. A little shorter than usual, but we did have our super long 2-hour plus double feature last time.
Ricky, it's always a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting discussion, and I know we've probably missed quite a few things on there. There's a lot to discuss on this topic. So if you do have any suggestions yourself that we perhaps missed or you'd like to build on, then we'd love to hear from you, either on Instagram at the Tabletop Minimalist, or you can email us at hello@thetabletopminimalist. It would be really great to have you involved in the discussion.
Absolutely. And I think most importantly, take some of the concepts and principles we talked about today and get your games played. Have fun.
See you next time. You've been listening to The Tabletop Minimalist. If you enjoyed the show, maybe leave us a review and follow us on our Instagram at The Tabletop Minimalist. You can also drop us a line at hello@thetabletopminimalist.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time, so long and happy gaming.